Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti. I am MrPhotographer.com. In this video, I'm going to talk about 3 things people don't use in Lightroom that they probably should. This video isn't just for the beginner. As a matter of fact, it's equally applicable to experienced users of Lightroom, maybe even more so, because many of us use Lightroom day in, day out, and we get kind of set in our ways, and we process our images in a similar way all the time, and we tend to ignore things that are available in Lightroom that, in many instances, will help you process your image better. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about is the tone curve. For example, I have this image here, and I'd like to bring more contrast into the sky. Now, I could put like a graduated filter down and increase contrast, but then I'd have to mask it away from the trees. Not impossible to do, but kind of a pain in the neck. Easier way maybe is to open the Basic tab, and this is probably the way most of us would try to do it. We'd go to the contrast slider and move it to the right. And you can see as I do that, it's kind of defeating the purpose. It's not really adding contrast to the sky. It's, if anything, removing contrast. Now, people might dabble in the tone curve. They'll go to the tone curve and they'll go to the point curve drop down and they'll try medium contrast. You can see that's not doing anything. Strong contrast, not helping the sky at all. If anything, that's making it worse as well. Then they might try to put a point down or two and move things around and see what happens. Well, do you know that there's actually another tone curve inside a Lightroom? By default, you'll see the point curve. But if you go over here to the far right and click this little square, you'll open up what's called the region curve. And many times the region curve is a little easier to use for specific images. And this image is one of them. For example, I could go to this highlight slider and just pull this slider down. And you could see how it's bringing contrast into the sky. And you're probably saying, well, why don't you just do that in the Basic tab? Well, I already maxed highlights. They're all the way at -100. Shadows are already at +100. I can't move those anymore. Tone curve, there it is, the region curve of the tone curve. Turn that down. Also, I could probably go to like shadows, let's say, and pull that down and add some contrast down there. Now that's a dramatic difference. There's before and there's after. And I'm not done. I could come in here and move these sliders around a little more to really make it to my liking. But a lot of people, in my opinion, are underutilizing the tone curve. A lot of people don't even know that region curve is there, that they could use it in a situation like this. It will work great. Now, one little hint when using it, if you hover over each of the sliders, for example, I hover over highlights, you'll see the actual tone curve above. The parts that are going to get affected by this slider will get kind of a highlight around it. So you can see it's up here. This part of the curve is going to get affected when I move the highlight slider. Conversely, go down to that lights, you'll see about like 3/4 of the curve. So it goes all the way into the midtones and even into the darker midtones. Darks go the other way around. From the lower left-hand side, about 3/4 of the way up towards the highlights, and shadows, just that lower left quadrant gets affected. So you could see exactly what parts of the curve get affected when you move these sliders around. So that's a little hint on using the region curve. And really, get in the habit of trying it out. You'll find that you'll be able to affect the tones a little more effectively with the region curve than you will with the point curve and or just moving highlight, shadows, whites, blacks, and contrast in the Basic tab. Now, the second thing that I see people underutilize in Lightroom is the Calibration tab. A lot of people totally ignore it. But there's a lot you could do here to affect the color. Now, you've probably seen one of my videos. I've done maybe 3 videos that I've called in different ways, either the single slider photo pop. Some photographers do utilize this, and it works particularly well for landscape images, travel images, and whatnot. You simply go down to the blue primary section of the Calibration tab and move the saturation slider to the right. And what will happen is it just kind of makes your image pop a little more. And you can see how it really is affecting the blue and the yellow in the grass. Specifically, what's happening when you move these saturation sliders, either the red primary, green primary, or blue primary, you're affecting kind of the mix of colors in the image, the way these colors blend together. And specifically with the blue primary, when you move saturation to the right, you're of course increasing the saturation of the blue, but you're also increasing the saturation of the yellow. And you may be wondering, well, why yellow? Well, yellow is the subtractive complementary color to blue. So if you keep that train of thought, we jump up to red. What's the subtractive complementary color to red? And that is cyan. So when you move this to the right, you're going to increase red and cyan. And finally, green, if you move that to the right, you're going to increase green and magenta. So that's how you could kind of affect the colors in the image. Now, of course, if you move it to the left, you're going to decrease green and magenta. With the blue primary, if you move the saturation slider to the left, you're going to decrease blue and yellow. And finally, with red, if you move that to the left, you're going to decrease red and cyan. So that's how those saturation sliders affect the image. The hue, you just kind of totally mixing up the color mix. So for example, let's take blue up. And if I move the blue primary to the far right, you can see how it's changing the colors all around because it's the way these colors mix together. And it's not necessarily only going to affect blue in the image like the HSL tab does. It really affects the mixture of these colors. So it will affect the image in a more profound way. Now, so I encourage you to experiment with these. At the very least, maybe on your landscape images, do that single slider photo pop I talk about. Move this to the right a little bit. And some people move it all the way up. But you could see how it will dramatically affect your image. Also, you could tint the shadows if you'd like to. This is more common in like street fashion. A lot of people like to tint shadows. And you could tint them to a cooler color. This is more towards magenta, or to the left, which is more towards green. So that will actually tint the shadows. That isn't used quite as much. But practice and experiment with the calibration tab. In my opinion, it is underutilized in Lightroom. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about maybe is a little more towards beginners. A lot of photographers, though, totally ignore the clipping indicators. As a matter of fact, many photographers, especially new photographers that are using Lightroom, don't even know what the clipping indicators are. And how I know that is they'll email me and they'll say, I have red blotches and blue blotches on my image and I can't get them off. Well, those are the clipping indicators, and I just turn those on by hitting the J key on my keyboard. Now you could go up to the histogram and just click on these little triangles in the corner and that will turn them on as well, or turn them off. Like I just turned the shadows off there. I could hover over it and it's on. I could click on it again, turn it on. Similarly for the highlights, I could click on it to turn those off, or hover over it to turn it on, or click on it to keep it on. The easiest way, in my opinion, just hit the J key and you could toggle those on and off. A lot of photographers just totally ignore the clipping indicators and they'll print an image like this and then they wonder why it looks so bad when it's printed. That's because wherever the highlights are clipping, there's no detail there at all. And when it's printed, there's no ink put down on the paper at all. So it's just paper. It doesn't look right. And on the other end, if you're clipping shadows, it's totally black. There's no detail there at all. So it's just black ink. And an image like this, it might not be as noticeable, but if you have a darker image with a lot of shadow in it and you're clipping a lot of that shadow, you're going to get a print that's just black ink and it's not going to look right. So don't ignore the clipping indicators. Turn them on, especially if you're going to send an image out to be printed or if you're going to print it yourself. Go to the basic tab and then most often just whites and blacks. All you need to do is adjust those. Go to the whites slider and pull it down until all that red is gone. And there's a lot of red on these windmills because those are white. But we'll turn those down until that's gone. And similarly, you could do the same for blacks. But if you're like me and you have a landscape, cityscape, travel shot, something like that, I like to clip blacks a little bit in those, or clip shadows a little bit in those types of images. because I feel it gives my image more tonal depth. It's just kind of my style, but it's up to you. Now in a portrait or a wildlife photo, stuff like that, I usually don't want to clip the shadows at all. So I will make sure that I move that till all that blue is gone. Now once you get rid of all that blue and all that red, don't forget to hit the J key again to turn off the clipping indicators, because when they're on, they're going to stay on. So you could go to another image and all of a sudden you're going to see this red and blue and it could be annoying. So it will always be on from image to image to image until you hit the J key again to turn it off. So that's it. 3 things that I think are underutilized in Lightroom, and I'd like to see all of you use it more. I think your images will just improve that much more, and I think you'll find that maybe it'll be a little more enjoyable to work in Lightroom, because you'll be, instead of creating the same old all the time, you'll create something a little bit different. Thank you, everyone who watches my videos. I really do appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.